to MovieNaut, where we will discuss cult classic movies from various genres and decades. Stay tuned for this episode. All right, well, I'm here with Gary and Bill, and we are going to talk about our favorite 1970s cult films, and most of them are horror movies. Some of them kind of fall under the thriller for me, but for the most part, they're horror movies. So I'll let you start, Gary.
Okay, well, we're just doing one movie at a time here.
Yeah, let's do one at a time.
Okay. So I don't have mine in any specific order here, and I just sort of went through, and I had to refresh my memory and go through 70s movies. And I know I mentioned this to you. I'm not really clear on the whole cult movie thing, so I've just sort of picked some movies that I don't think were huge smashes. It's kind of hard because a lot of stuff became like legendary later, and it's like, so you don't know really that big a deal then or not. But I think I'll start off with the movie The Car. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I have to think that Stephen King saw that and that inspired him to write Christine, because you've got a demonic car that is going around killing people. Now, Christine gets more into the owner of the car and how it affects him. There is no owner of this car. It's driverless. It's just a possessed car going around killing people, which I think it might have been a made-for-TV movie. And you know, there's some dumb stuff in it, but there's some dumb stuff in every movie, I think. Most of them anyway. But I really, really enjoyed that movie. The car, they took like a Lincoln Continental, I think, that's all black. And they crushed down the roof, so it's like it looks really funky and very evil looking. It's a really interesting movie.
Now, didn't it have those suicide doors where the back opens up differently than? Because I know there was a lot of cars back.
I don't think so. You only really saw the door open once in that movie, and that was when Josh Brolin came up to it and or no, it wasn't Josh, it was his dad. What's his dad's name? James Brolin. Yeah, he comes up to the car and he tries to open the door and there's no handles. And then all of a sudden the door opens and smashes him. That's the only time you see the doors open. I think suicide doors, I think, were just a Thunderbird thing, but they might have had them in Lincoln's. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good movie. I like that. I can think it. I think there was a few kind of killer car movies between then and Christine.
Yeah, I think
some of them not as good.
There was also Killdozer, which was not that good. Wasn't there? No. There was also a movie called, I think there was also a movie called Rubber, maybe, that was a killer tire, which I have never seen, but I've only seen little bits about it. It sounds really stupid.
It sounds so bad it could be good, very good.
Yeah, it might be.
Yeah. All right, I'll let Bill go next.
Okay, like Gary, mine are not in any real particular order. Most are horror. I threw a couple of science fiction movies in there. But number one, I put in Theater of Blood with Vincent Price, when he is killing all of his reviewers. He was a Shakespearean actor. Vincent Price was a Shakespearean actor, and he always got really bad reviews in all the newspapers. So he goes on a rampage and kills all the reviewers in Shakespearean ways, uses some of the plays and ways to kill his bad reviewers. It's a lot of fun, of course. Probably everyone has seen that one. That one's maybe mildly a cult movie, but it's kind of cult because you have to know something about Shakespeare in order to to really appreciate it.
I read somewhere that they also call it the unofficial third part to the Dr. Phibes, because it kind of has a very similar.
It was from that same era, I could see. Yeah, I could see it.
Yeah.
Well, it does. Dr. Phibes was there was a certain amount of that. That's what I thought of as soon as you mentioned it.
Right. And I think they're both British films, or at least they both had British actors. I know the Phibes films, I believe, are British, but this at least had several British actors in there. I just love that the one line where they're doing a sword fight on the trampolines and everything. And Vincent Price finally gets the one reviewer down, and he's quoting Shakespeare, and the guy says, "Oh, just kill me and get it over with," or something like that.
Right.
Just stop doing this and kill me, for crying out loud.
Oh,
It
yeah.
has to be better than this performance, kind of thing. Is the implied meaning there. It didn't used to be called a comedy, but when I look it up now online, it says horror comedy. I saw it as that way all along, but it's one of those things I kind of thought I was the only one.
Probably more like a black comedy or something.
Was there even such a category as horror comedy back then? I think maybe Bodies was the first one.
If there was, it was just budding. I'm sure it wasn't many. There wasn't many getting that label at that point. But it's kind of, when you look it up online now, they call it a dark comedy or a horror comedy. But I'd say it's more horror than comedy. But still, it has its moments.
Yeah. So my first pick, I'm doing them in alphabetical order. It's just easier for me to do it. It's this. I'll show it. It's called The Baby. Now, I first saw this late night, kind of like how you see on Saturday nights was a Svengoolie. But in LA, they had a guy just before Elvira took over. There was a guy. He was called Uncle Seymour, and it was a vampire that had, instead of white, it was like greenish makeup. And I read later on the guy was drunk half the time. And so I don't think he gave a damn. He just talked about the movie. But this is where I first saw it. And what it is this is more of a thriller than a horror movie. It's basically this upper class family kidnaps this baby, but this baby is actually it's a man that actually had a traumatic brain thing, and he's reduced to being an infant for the rest of his life. And they were really bad to this baby, and then they hired a nanny to take care of it, and they noticed the nanny was getting a little too close to the baby, and basically towards the end of the movie is where it kind of has the horror element. The babysitter basically had enough and killed the mother and the two sisters and took that baby, and it turned out that she had her husband had one of those issues. So it had kind of like a weird happy ending where now the husband has a playmate, and it was just had a dark mood about it. I think it was from 1970 or 71, and it was just possibly one of the weirdest movies I had seen up until that point. But it's a good one. I mean, I revisit it a lot, and then when it came out on Blu-ray, on Arrow, it's got all the bells and whistles on it, so you get to see the behind the scenes footage, and kind of, if you're really into watching the bonus features, it's a lot of good bonus features.
Yeah, Arrow does some great stuff with adding bonus features and nice packaging, and they do some really good stuff.
There is a Alfred Hitchcock hour, I think. I don't think it's presents. I think it's when it went to an hour. That is very similar to that. I wonder if I'm kind of Googling some of these as I go, if you guys name them.
Right.
But I can't find if there's a similar source to both of those That's what I was kind of looking for. But there is an Alfred Hitchcock Hour episode that is a very similar plot to that. I was wondering if there was a
Yeah,
similar
it could have been
source
could
material.
have been nicked. Could have been
Yeah.
nicked from the Alfred Hitchcock thing. I mean,
But he used to take
they have
his shows from short stories and books and things.
right.
So I don't know if that one came from a novel of some kind or whatever, but as an original source material.
Yeah, it has a really dark, ominous kind of a feel to it. I mean, at the same time, there's like some very bright moments, but for the most part, it's the in the rich family, the mother is like the queen bitch, and the daughters are like these spoiled little brats, and it's kind of almost, I want to kind of say, in the Cinderella category.
That's what I was thinking when you were saying that.
You know, it has that. So maybe they took bits and pieces of things and just mashed it together and kind of created. Because that's what I noticed in the 70s is they had a little more original ideas, you know, and some of them were really far out.
That's for sure.
I think there was a lot more experimentation in the 70s that you don't really get
Yes.
today.
True.
Which I think is, what made them better.
I think
Most part.
also there was, while for the time, it was a lot of money that was invested in filmmaking. Filmmaking wasn't nearly as expensive as it is now, even in the dollars of the time. So I think they were able and more willing to take chances with things more than they are now. Now they want something that's, oh, it's got this name, or it's a sequel to this, it's a prequel to that, it's a remake of that, or it's got this big star who's going to bring people into the theater. I think they want something that's more guaranteed success on some level.
Yeah, you have to almost, guaranteed success. That's what I was about to throw in there.
But I think you're getting the really creative stuff in some of the little indie movies that are coming out there. And a lot of those are like the indies that happened in the 80s and 90s, like the Charles Band stuff that just sort of goes direct to video. And I think you get a lot more of that thinking outside the box inside that realm. But that stuff doesn't get as much attention as the big name stuff does. So a lot of times you don't hear about it.
Right. Now we have direct to streaming, which is probably equivalent to direct to video that we had in the 80s and 90s, but
right.
Yeah. It's got good and bad points.
It does. There are, yeah.
Good points with the streaming of any kind is you get the instant access and access from wherever your device is. You could be out on the road and you have your tablet, and if you're taking a train or a bus somewhere, you got your tablet, you can watch, download some movies there, you can watch them there. And so it's convenience, but it's like, to me, like the both of you, nothing beats physical media.
No, that's right. I'm all about physical media.
All right, you're next.
Okay. So my next one, I'm going to continue with the creepy vehicle thing, and go with Duel, which again, that's one that's really, really well known now, but I don't know how well known it was at the time. I think that was made for TV as well, and I remember seeing it on TV, and that was Spielberg's first movie. And I'm not actually a big Spielberg fan. To me, his stuff tends to be a little too family oriented and a little too happy and almost kid-like sometimes. And but Duel was not. You've got I'm sure you guys have seen it, but for anybody who hasn't, you've got this truck that's chasing a guy in a car, and there's a little bit of an interaction between them with some honking and passing and stuff, just some little minor road rage type stuff, but it's nothing really big. And then all of a sudden the truck driver seems just out to kill the guy. And actually, I read something that's sort of not in the movie, but I read that if you look at the truck, there are a number of license plates on the truck, a number of different ones. And I guess Spielberg's idea with that was that this wasn't the first time this guy had done this. And every time he killed somebody, he took their plate and put it on his truck, which is kind of an interesting little angle to it. So, but again, you don't really catch that from the movie. But there are some really tense moments in that movie. And personally, I was like, there were a couple times when I thought, what is up with this guy? Because like when he's pulls up, when he's at the truck stop and the truck's right there, personally, if it were me, I would have either flattened all the tires with a knife, or I would have waited for the guy to come out and been like, what is your problem, man? But he just doesn't. He gets on the road and tries to outrun him again, which was dumb, but yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah.
Scenes from it were used in an episode of The Incredible Hulk. I always like to throw that one out there whenever he brings up.
I think scenes from that were used in a lot of shows.
Probably, yeah, I think you're right.
I think they recycled a lot of little chase scenes in there, little parts of the chases.
Oh yeah, that was what they used for the Hulk, I know.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm up.
Yep.
My second one is I had to throw in a little bit of, see, when I do these things, I have to like check a couple boxes. So I checked my Vincent Price box. Now I'm going to check my Euro horror box. And I actually wore the shirt. It doesn't have this movie on it, but Paul Naschy. I have to throw in a Paul Naschy movie. He was huge in the 70s. Big with the drive-in movies. And one of my favorites, just barely makes the list at 1970, is Assignment Terror. That's the one where he is facing, well, if you don't know, Paul Naschy was most famous for playing the werewolf Waldemar Daniński. Because he's Spanish horror movie. He had to have a Polish name for his werewolf because Spain is a very heavily Catholic country, and the government actually funds their films. So in order to say, well, this isn't happening here, this is this Polish guy. And a lot of times he had to get funding from other countries. But anyway, in Assignment Terror, it's one of his most fun movies. It actually has his best cast because it is the last starring role of Michael Rennie of The Day the Earth Stood Still. And there's a woman in there named Corinne Dorr, who was a Bond girl in one of the James Bond movies. And she was in Hitchcock's Frenzy. And she's slumming it over here, no doubt. But this is the one where you have Waldemar Daniński as the werewolf. You have a Frankenstein-type monster. I think they call him the Frank Sullen monster. They changed all the names, these really weird things. I don't know if they have translations that make more sense. Not to my knowledge, but maybe they do. There's a mummy. And there's a vampire. What was that vampire's name? Let me look at this real quick here. But it is available in all kinds of places, but no longer under the title Assignment Terror. Now it is known as Dracula versus Frankenstein, one of the several films that's known as Dracula versus Frankenstein, which is actually a terrible title for it because Frankenstein's monster and the vampire never, I don't even think they're on screen at the same time. They definitely never fight. If they are on screen together at some point, it's briefly, if at all. Let me see here. What's the name of that monster? What do they call the vampire? That's what's bothering me here. Let me pick this up. Where's that vampire? So Michael Rennie is an alien once again, kind of like his platoon, coming back to Count Janos de Malov is the vampire. No wonder I couldn't remember that.
You just roll right off your tongue.
Exactly, I know, right? No wonder I didn't. Yeah, right on the tip of my tongue. But Naschy actually later admitted that he really got the inspiration for this from the House of Frankenstein, the old Universal horror movies. He was a big fan of that. Michael Rennie plays an alien, and they are coming to Earth to try and take over the world. And in order to take over the world, they're bringing together all of Earth's monsters to come and terrorize the Earth to take over the world.
From outer space, right?
What's that?
Almost a Plan 9 from outer space.
Yeah, well, you know, Why not? If you're gonna steal from the worst, I say.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But I love Naishi films. They're a lot of fun. I wouldn't say they're good, but since you brought up Ed Wood, they are very similar to Ed Wood, and he had that enthusiasm. It just rolls off the screen. You can't deny either Ed Wood or Paul Naschy's enthusiasm for the horror genre. They love
Right.
this. You can tell they're just having a time of their lives on screen, even if the product isn't that great.
All right. Well, my next one is The Brood. This is another one of Cronenberg's body horror, and this was like downright creepy. You know, it had the creepy element, and you always, it's like always on edge when you're. I mean, it's got a nice slow pace, but you're on edge. Like, what is going on? You know, what are these whatever they were, but basically the kids, and it was kind of a psychological thing of that they were a manifestation of the woman's um, emotions, and it just, that's the one thing with Cronenberg's horror movies, they're almost, I want to say, like thinking man's horror movies, because he doesn't put together schlocky stuff. He really puts. I mean, he's done so many amazing horror movies, and this one, towards the end, this was 1979, and it's another good company that is a Criterion, and I got this, and it's like I watch it every once in a while, and it's like it's one of the more bizarre movies in my library, and I recommend, if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend looking it up. I mean, and if you like any of other David Cronenberg stuff from the '70s, you'll like this. It's good, and it's got Oliver Reed in it, which he tends to kind of make things, I don't know, more interesting.
Oliver Reed is a trip.
Yeah,
He's a very good
as
actor.
far back as I can remember, he was. What was that one movie? It was in the '60s, Curse of the Werewolf.
Curse of the Werewolf. Yeah, it was
Even back then, he was a little.
Well, I think it was all the alcohol.
Yeah, but it's a good one. If you love Cronenberg, you'll love this one. But don't expect it to be all fast paced. It has it has kind of a slow crawl in places, but it's telling a story, which is something nowadays audiences can't deal with, having a story in a horror movie. That's almost an alien concept. It's like, no, just have people killing each other. No reason, just killing each other, and that's it. Or a monster coming in and just destroying everything. But good stuff here.
Movies were more of a slow burn then. You don't really get a
Yeah.
lot.
I see a lot of YouTubers that talk about movies, that they're a lot younger than us, and they're comparing how the pacing of a 1970s movie to what they're used to in 2020. And it's like it's a different. There are different eras, and you gotta appreciate how things were filmed in the '70s. That for the most part, unless they were blockbuster movies, they were slow on their storytelling.
But then, as far as modern stuff, then you get into I don't know the guy's name, but he did The Witch and The Lighthouse. Now those I have not seen The Lighthouse. I watched The Witch, and everybody raved about that movie. I hated it. I thought it was so slow. Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. And then the last 10 minutes, the payoff is great, but it simply wasn't worth sitting through the rest of it. No, I will give him, it was brilliant filmmaking because he had them do it in the English of the time, which meant I had to turn on my captioning because I couldn't understand what they were saying. But,
Right.
but so you do have some people still doing that slow stuff, and they're doing it
Right.
really slow.
There's a few that aren't too bad. I have a teenage daughter, and I've somehow gotten her into horror movies. So she turned me on to this movie called The Boy.
Oh my God, that movie. My wife fell asleep when we watched it, but oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, it's very good. It was a slow burn. That managed to. I don't think it was a huge hit. I'd never even heard of it until she said something about it. But
Very Lovecraftian.
yeah, that one was very good. I haven't seen this. There is a sequel, but after seeing the first one, I'm like, where can they go from here?
Yeah, you get a few good ones
now and again, yeah.
But to me, it's kind of few and far between nowadays. It's like
certainly fewer and further between than they used to be, for sure. No doubt about it.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of them don't know if they have a short filming time, they don't know how to deal with it, and so they rush things and just like slap things together. Whereas back in the before the 80s, if they had a short period of time, they thought out what they were going to do. And so I got 7 days to shoot this. Okay, had everything set up. Whereas I think a lot of the newer horror B movies, they're just making up shit as they're going along half the time. It's like, oh, let's put a zombie here. Well, why?
Why is there a zombie here?
Why is there a zombie? What is it doing? And like you were saying, that how they titled that one, Dracula versus Frankenstein. I think there is Frankenstein versus the Mummy out there.
Yes, I have not seen that one. That's been on my watch list for a while, actually. I'm not expecting it to be very good cinema, but I think I do want to see that, actually.
Some of them are, like you said earlier, so bad that they're going to be good. You're going to just, you could just like lampoon it, while you're watching, and make fun of every single thing that happens. But it's, I really like these old movies. It's just, they're really good. So on to you.
Okay, I'm gonna go for my next one. I'm gonna go with a remake. The 1970s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And remakes are often not that good, but that movie really, really worked in the remake. You've got Donald Sutherland, you got Leonard Nimoy, and you really can't go wrong with those two. And just the whole paranoia of not knowing who you're dealing with and having them be able to replace people you already know with some alien monster is terrifying if you think about it.
Right.
It's like especially because the pods replace the copy the memories of the people. Right. So you can't even ask them a question about some fact because they're going to know the answer to that. If you have somebody set up a keyword, they're going to know what that keyword is and tell you.
That was one that scared the.
What's that?
That one scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I saw that in the theater, and I thought it was very, very good in the theater. But I don't think it did well at all in the theater.
No.
It sort of caught on later. It got cult following, and it caught on later.
Yeah.
But the original's brilliant too. You can't argue with that.
Oh
one.
Yeah.
But I think the remake is at least as good as the original.
Yeah, that is
one. It dealt with the modern, climate. In the 70s they had a lot of paranoia. Basically after Vietnam and everything. So it's like people were coming back different, and so I think they figured, well, this is something that needs to be remade, because we can bring something else to the table.
Yeah,
And
'cause
that's where I like remakes.
the original version was sort of an anti-communism thing.
Right.
It was
It
with the
who's a
whole
communist. Yeah.
McCarthy stuff going on and everything. So but I think you're right. I think plus there were a lot of, at the time, the whole culture wars were really what's being called the culture wars now, but it was counterculture sort of catching on and becoming powerful. And I think that was a fear of a lot of older people at the time. And I think that was sort of addressed in that movie too. Yeah.
Right. That's a good one. I mean, 1977.
Sounds right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was 11 years old, and I don't think I saw that in the theater. I think or if I did, it was like one of those double features, like a few years later, like towards the end of the 70s, and that's where it scared me. I was like, oh my God, they can be replaced. And I think it fueled the audience's paranoia too. It's like, they look at the person next to you. Is that someone real?
It's like, how well do I really know this person?
Right. And I know they've remade it a few other times. I think two other times.
I've seen 2 or 3 remakes since then, and I've actually liked all of them. I mean, a lot of people go off on them being really poor quality, but I just think it's a good story. No matter how you tell it, it just turns out well.
It seems like, well, each decade has something that they can put onto it. I'm sure if they wanted to remake it, in this decade, they would have plenty of stuff to deal with.
Definitely.
All right, Bill.
All right, my next one, I label this sometimes as one of the most underrated movies of all time, or horror movies at least in my opinion. The blaxploitation movie, it's got a stupid title, but it's actually a really good film if you can sit through and get past that stupid title. Blackula with William Marshall. The plot actually makes sense. The vampire Blackula was supposed to be a slave of Dracula, and he gets released by, and it's actually very advanced for its time. Some of the earliest jump scares. He gets released by a gay couple buying a house together. I mean, how advanced is that for the early 1970s at that?
Right.
So he gets released by them accidentally, of course. He goes on his usual rampage. And there are some very legitimate jump scares right around the same time as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was, I believe, the same year, or, there might be a year off in there, but it's somewhere around the same year, anyway, same time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that one. Again, that was on that Uncle Seymour's thing late on Saturday night, watching that. I was like, oh my God. I was like going,
go ahead.
I was like going, well, now anyone could be a vampire.
I love the ending of that because, I mean, I'm guessing anybody watching this has probably seen the movie. So it's not, and it's been out long enough that I don't think it's a spoiler so much, but I love the ending of that because at the end, he basically commits suicide, which you've got some morality in it,
Yeah, it's a real sleeper, for people who can't get past that title. You don't know what you're missing. And the
sequel
title. Yeah, and the sequel wasn't too bad either. I was trying to work in some Pam Grier in here somewhere, but at least I have a touch in there. She's in the sequel, Scream Blackula Scream. But I couldn't fit in Pam Grier. I had to make some adjustments.
The black exploitation stuff. I mean, there was what was that one? I'm gonna probably butcher the name. Junga and Jess, where it's one of them is a vampire. I've only seen part of it, but it has almost the same kind of a vibe as Blackula, because even though they were playing it very serious, but there was kind of some ha 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 moments
Mhm.
what they did, but it still had a dark feel to it.
Yeah.
Nope.
I've heard of that one. I haven't actually seen that one, but some of those films really are not bad. They're pretty good. A
No.
lot of them are action films. Not too many of them are horror. Most of the horror ones are really bad, except for Blackula, I would argue. But
Yeah. Yeah, I like that one.
and of
I
course,
had that on.
William Marshall goes on to be the king of cartoons on Pee-wee's Playhouse, so we can't forget that either.
Oh yeah, I
And he
have
was
those.
before that, he was
Blackula.
Dr. Daystrom on Star Trek.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
He
he
created
shows
the
up in a lot of
M5 computer.
he shows up in a lot of shows.
Yeah, yeah.
He's on an episode of Benson as Death or something like that. When Benson has like a near-death experience, he pops up and it's really, he's got that booming voice,
Oh yeah,
very
he had the voice. He was one of those guys who could narrate a phone book and it would have sounded good.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. I almost wish he would have done more horror throughout his career. I mean, he was really good at it.
Yeah, you probably could have done, just like how Christopher Lee did Dracula, the Mummy, and Frankenstein. He could probably have done the same thing and got away with it,
Sure.
with ease. Yeah, I had those movies on VHS way back in the day, and I never got around to upgrading to DVD or Blu-ray, but I think I want to get that in my collection. I know my girlfriend, she doesn't like the weird horror movies. She just says, give me a straightforward horror movie and I'll be fine. But my next one is one that literally scared the shit out of me when I first saw it in the mid 70s. And children shouldn't play with dead things. This movie was the very first horror movie, and like you said, if you hadn't seen it, it has a very grim ending, and the type of ending that, how do you say nowadays? There was no final girl, there was no final anybody, and it just, a lot of, I think, because of how it was raising the dead, and there was these zombies. I kind of attribute them more towards kind of like a 50-50 between the voodoo zombie and the Romero zombie. And when they're reading the incantation, kind of reminds later on Evil Dead. So it's like I'm sure Sam Raimi watched this and got some ideas from it. But this is like, I want to say one of my favorite zombie movies of all time. It's very campy, but it's not stupid. Some of the acting is a little dry, but I think that's what gives it its flavor. These people are kind of two-dimensional. You really don't feel sorry for any of them when they die. Because literally, I think that in their own ways, they're various degrees of being an asshole.
But you know what Bill said about Blackula, you've got a gay character in this one too.
Yeah,
actually two gay characters, and those guys actually were kind of innocent, though. If there were any innocent characters in there, it's those two.
Oh yeah, those two. I mean, they were. It's like you kind of rooted for them, and then you kind of like that. They got it. And but if you notice on these slow-moving zombies, which I love, everybody tends to not know what to do, and it's like you could have gotten off the island.
Oh yeah,
could have pushed them out of the way and gotten off that island, and you would, and somehow get that island quarantined. But no, because I think some of them boarded a boat.
That's what. Yeah, that's
And-
the
And was
end
it?
on the boat, and the zombies get on the boat and start heading toward the mainland.
And I think that's in New York.
I don't know. I don't remember that. But
I think it's like one of the little islands around New York City. I think that's what it was. I could be wrong, but there was another one where something happened in New York, and zombie. But that's a good movie. I mean, and of course, I don't even know what the company this is, but it's newly restored, and it looks better than ever.
when did that one come out?
I believe I want to say maybe 10 or so years ago. I think
Okay.
maybe 2013, 2015, somewhere in that area.
Because there's all right, so this is actually on my list too. So this will count as one of my movies as well, because I actually made my list.
Yeah,
Arrow.
it has the alternate cover.
Okay.
I mean, I kind of like this cover, but I think this was more the original cover.
The Arrow just released a 50th anniversary edition or something this year, and I did a
Oh
review,
wow!
and it's got so much bonus material. And part of the bonus material, they're talking like with the director, I believe it was, and he said that they literally got the idea to do the movie because they went to see Night of the Living Dead at the theater, and they're like, "Hey, we could do a zombie movie." So, but
Right.
I highly, highly, highly recommend you get that Arrow version that just came out.
Arrow
It's
version.
so good.
I'm trying to
It
see
is so good. And I think they
What company?
restored it again and did a really good job of it. That movie
Yeah,
is very groundbreaking, and it's almost tongue in cheek at times, but then it
Yeah.
is so dark. And I think I've seen places where they call it a horror comedy, and there is a comedic aspect to it for sure, but it's the horror. It's very gory for the time, and
right. It was, it's perfect. It has that. This one is actually perfect to watch around Halloween
oh yeah,
because you have to, or when the days are getting less and less hours, and it's like, because I noticed it's like this all happens at night, and so it's like, I mean, I think I saw another movie years later where the zombies only come out at night, so it's like people have to survive the night. And
I think actually filmmakers a lot of times do movies at night because you can't see the makeup effects that well, and if you've got a really low, it's a great way to make them look better.
That's possible.
Right? Didn't they have kind of similar kind of colored makeup that they had in Dawn of the Dead? I think kind of like greenish.
Yeah, I think so, as I recall. Yeah.
And I didn't realize how there's quite a few the Romero type zombies in between night and dawn.
Oh
I
yeah.
never even knew.
If you go,
I mean, I could have that could be a show in itself. Talking about the different zombie films that came out.
And the funny thing about that is Romero at the time said and everybody involved in that movie said they're not zombies, they're ghouls. Because zombies they're done by voodoo. These aren't voodoo, they're ghouls. They they're dead things and eat dead bodies. But then since then they've been called zombies.
yeah, if you watch the original Night of the Living Dead, they never call them zombies. Only once do they refer to them as anything, and it is ghouls is the term they use.
Yeah. I think because of the source material on that one, I Am Legend, the creatures in those were ghouls, so he kind of kept with that part.
Actually, in I Am Legend, they're vampires.
Yeah, they're more.
They act like although they act like what we would today term as zombies. But
Yeah.
if you go way back in filmmaking, we're talking about filming at night. If you go way back in filmmaking, like the 30s and 40s, those those Poverty Row films were made at night because the major studios weren't using the studios at the time, and they could use their studio to make their films, so they had to film like overnight.
Like the Spanish version of Dracula.
Yeah, that was one. Yeah, that's an example. A lot of them were done that. A lot of those Poverty Row, little cheapy Poverty Row movies from PRC and Monogram and things like that too, are filmed on major lots, but overnight.
Right. All right, Jerry.
Well, I guess we covered my next one because my next one is the same as yours. So.
Okay. Go over to Bill.
Want to go back over to me? All right. Now I'm doing the proper version of Dracula versus Frankenstein, the one by Al Adamson. That's a fun little film. It was supposed to be, it's the last film of Lon Chaney Jr. and J. Carrol Naish, who were from, the original Universal horror movies. Another one inspired by those old Universal horror movies. And it used to be, let me see if I can find what it was originally supposed to be called. And actually, there was even a third movie of Dracula versus Frankenstein from around that same era. So, you could almost do something. And that was by Jess Franco, but that was actually Dracula Contra Frankenstein or Dracula Prisoner of Frankenstein. But anyway, to do this one, we had Zandor Vorkov as Count Dracula. Of course, Al Adamson directs it. Lon Chaney Jr., it's his last film. And John Bloom plays the Frankenstein monster. And he actually shows up later in his career as Harry from Harry and the Hendersons. Like 15 years later, 14, 15 years later, something like that. So it was originally wasn't even supposed to have the Dracula and Frankenstein thing to it. That was added later. It was supposed to be some kind of little axe murder story with Lon Chaney Jr. having the axe and J. Carrol Naish being the mad scientist, sending him out there in trances to go kill people and stuff. And that stuff's still in there, but it would probably be not an almost unwatchable film if they didn't throw in Dracula and Frankenstein later on.
Right.
It also has the original equipment from the 1930s and 40s Universal horror films, the Frankenstein equipment that they used to reanimate the monster. It always makes me scoff when you read about Young Frankenstein from Mel Brooks. He says, "Yeah, we went and we got the original equipment and everything." And I'm like, "Yeah, they did the same thing in Dracula versus Frankenstein almost the same year, like a year or two earlier." Of course, the stuff is still working. But I love Mel Brooks. I love Young Frankenstein. But just to throw that out there, that he always makes a big deal that the equipment was still working. Also, there's a small role in there. One of the victims is Forrest J. Ackerman. And they actually gave him a role in the part because he helped organize them to get that Frankenstein equipment.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if he owned it, but somehow he was like the middleman, or so he got them the equipment. So they couldn't pay him because it's a cheaply made film. So they said, "How about a part in the film?" And Forey J, Uncle Forey, as most call him, said, "Yeah, let's do that." So he becomes a victim of the monster. It's pretty cheesy. It also has Anthony Isley. And if you were to make a list of the top 50 or 100 worst movies ever made, I'd be willing to bet at least half of them had a part for Anthony Isley. He was in everything, every B movie, Navy versus the Night Monsters with Mamie Van Doren. He's in episodes of every TV show you could name in the 70s and early 80s. He's just one of those familiar faces. Plays like a 40-year-old hippie in this one.
Yeah.
Rather poorly cast. But it's a fun little film. I first caught it on Elvira's Movie Macabre way back when.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of good ones from hers. Obviously, she made those watching those movies a little more fun.
Did.
The way she just, just before the commercial break, she would come on and say a little something about what would happen, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're watching a movie that's kind of cut up, but but then we're getting Elvira making fun of it, so it's like, it's kind of a win-win there
It
in a
was.
way.
That's sort of the joy of all the horror hosts if they're doing their job right. I mean, that's like I always say with Svengoolie, it's like I don't really care what movie's on there because I'm there to watch the Svengoolie parts. And if the movie's good, then that's just sort of a bonus. But if I hate the movie, for instance, one that he was playing for a while was the one that's written by Dr. Seuss. It's like something about 5,000 fingers of Dr. Something with these kids are trapped in pianos. And I absolutely hate that movie, but I could stand it for Svengoolie.
I noticed on Cinema Insomnia, the movie host is Mr. Lobo. He's one of the newer guys out there. He has a website, but I interviewed him one time for Wormwood Chronicles, Mike Horn's little magazine there, and
We both write for.
I made a note. I noted to him that I noticed the worse movie it is, the better your wraparounds are. And he comes up with some pretty good quips. And actually, I remember one of the quips that Elvira made during Dracula versus Frankenstein. I still remember it because it was late at night, and back then, if you could actually have a little touch of nudity if it wasn't on screen too long, and maybe nobody else really
Right.
noticed or something. I don't know what the deal was back then, but there is a very quick. If you blink, you miss it. Dr. Frankenstein, J. Carrol Naish, unveils the creature, which is a female monster that he's making, and one of her breasts is shown, and he puts it back right away. And when they went to commercial, Elvira says, "What a cheap movie this is. I mean, they could only afford one boob."
Right. Yeah. That's what I loved about it.
It was because I was like 10 years old when I saw it. I don't know.
And that, like I was saying, that Uncle Seymour was just basically a drunk old vampire. And half the time his comments didn't make any sense whatsoever. So every time I knew that he was coming in, I just went out of the room and waited for the movie to come back on. Because it was, after a while, it was kind of unwatchable, his parts, but then if you look, I'm looking back at it, I think I would have been laughing my ass off every time the guy showed up. Comes out of the coffin and stumbles out, probably would have broken his foot or something, but he just stumbles out and then announces the movie, and then the movie starts, and then he comes back in between like Elvira does, and his puns were, very miss. I don't think the guy watched the movie ahead of time. I think he had someone else watch it and then write down things, and the other person probably didn't get what the movie was about. But all right, I'm gonna have a movie that I'm gonna put up that Gary actually reviewed, and there's two pronunciations of it: Dunwich horror or Dunwich horror. It just depends. Dunwich is, I think, is the one that's in England, and Dunwich is the American town. And I agree with a lot of the points that you had on your review. Yeah, it was a lot of. It was just inspired by Lovecraft. It wasn't a true Lovecraft movie, but for 1970s, was Dean Stockwell playing that character. You wouldn't. We all know him from Quantum Leap, but him to play this dark character, and it had almost like a gothic feel to it. And I think if people, like you were saying, if they can get past being one of those purists that just watch the movie, you'll 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 see some beauty in it. And I just loved it. I mean, this was another late night Saturday one that I watched, and I think what was it, done by API or something like that?
I think so, yeah.
And
Something
I mean, they uh, oh, Roger Corman.
oh yeah, it was Roger Corman. But I think
Yes,
did he actually, I don't, that one I don't remember if he actually directed it though. I think he's just a producer, if I
I think
remember right.
so.
Yeah, because he did the Haunted Palace, which is another Lovecraft. He did that one and he actually directed that one. This one he just produced. I actually wrote a piece about the two Roger Corman ones recently. So and this is another movie that's also on my list, so we'll just sort of share in on this one.
Right. Yeah.
As far as the Lovecraft stuff, I would say they actually got some stuff very right, which
Yeah.
for the time period, the whole idea of these ancient beings that are out there and so much greater and so alien to human was actually pretty good. I mean, it's pretty amazing that they did that at the time that they did. Whately's character in the movie is very different from the one in the story, but the one in the story is like 7 feet tall and has very non-human features. It would have been very, very hard for them to do it and to get some woman to go with him, which isn't in the story, of course, but to make him as charming as he was, it would have been really hard to pull that off. So I think some of the changes,
and like you were saying, about the cover, with the inverted cross. I mean, I think to spice up the movie, they probably added in the Satanism.
Yeah, and one of the commenters when I put my video out there, and I hadn't even noticed it. I sort of blanked out when it was on. The opening credits, there's a bunch of animation, and they do the Satanism thing in the animation for the opening credits too, which makes me think that the animator didn't actually see the movie and had never read the story, because it has nothing to do with the story or the movie really. But the animation's beautiful, but it doesn't fit the movie.
Right. This was one, when I saw that it was originally on, I think it was Shout Factory, but as a double feature with Murders at the Rue Morgue or something like that. And I never got around to getting that Blu-ray, but then all of a sudden it went out of print and the prices kind of skyrocketed. And then when Arrow announced it, I'm like, okay, well, I got to get it. And Amazon made a big mistake. They sent me 2 copies. So I sold my second one to a friend of mine. I go, look, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking, but it was a bonus on my part. And a friend of mine, he always wanted to see it. And I said, there you go. But
I really, really, really like that movie. A lot of Lovecraft purists dislike it very much, but it is actually, and I love the whole psychedelic aspect, and I love how they use the psychedelic to sort of show the things that are things that the human mind couldn't wrap themselves around, which, how else are you going to show stuff like that? They say that Lovecraft is unfilmable because of some of that stuff. Well, I think they made a really good effort at sort of capturing that by using the whole psychedelic thing.
I think it's because a lot of his stories are, on a different plane of existence. And like you said, something that the human mind couldn't understand. So I think that was perfect, putting the psychedelic stuff in there, because that's basically, it could have been someone thinking, oh, it was like an acid trip or something like that.
Yeah, and Lovecraft, one of the things that he was sort of notorious for doing. He's not describing creatures. He would sort of say, if you were to see it, it would drive you insane, or
Yeah.
your brain couldn't capture this. And I've always wondered how much of that was the fact that he didn't know how to describe it. He just wasn't capable in his writing skills of describing it, and how much was the fact that he knows that if your brain is going to fill in the details, it's going to make it more personally frightening to you than he could ever paint it. There's sort of both sides of that, and I've never really been sure which one he was doing, but it does make it hard for people to film.
I think it is when you don't describe the monsters very well. In fact, to bring us back to our 70s films, I think that's one thing that the 70s films are much better than today's films, because today you have CGI, you can make the monster look like whatever you want.
Right.
Those days, the movie makers didn't want you to see their silly little puppets, so they'd film at night and they'd have dark screens and they wouldn't show it all the way.
Right.
But it helps your brain fill in the gaps, so it makes it scarier. Actually, it's actually better to not see it. The stupid puppets work better because you can't really see that it's a puppet unless you're really looking real close. Look at it frame by frame or something like that.
I think whenever they filmed during the day, they did a lot of shadowing. Instead of like lighting, doing full lighting like they normally would do, they probably did a little shadowing. And I always like movies that when you see a corner and it's dark and you don't know what's there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's more scarier than someone coming out with an axe. At least there, I got a chance I can defend myself. I can't defend myself on something I don't know.
I've actually got a short story that I wrote. Actually, the ending is where something comes out of the corner, and it's like, was it there the whole time and you just couldn't see it because that was the one part of the room that was in shadow, or did it just appear?
Right.
And I never make that clear. The person who sees it is actually wondering which it is, if he just hadn't seen it the whole time and it was always there, or what.
Shadows can
always a lot of this movie, it was kind of like mysterious and implied, and like you were saying earlier, kind of, I think Lovecraft, I mean, I don't know for sure, nobody really knows. I think he left that vague because he wanted the reader at the time, and now the audience, to make up their own mind, because a monster, the one that he says that you wouldn't, you'd go insane if you knew what it was. It'll look different. My version of the monster will look different than yours and Bill's. So it's like,
exactly.
So I think that is where the true horror element comes in, because now you made it personal.
And that's where Lovecraft really advanced the whole horror genre, because I think he was the first one to really do that in that way. And I think even into today, you don't get a lot of description of monsters when you read horror literature anymore. It's a lot of dark shadows and things that can't be described and things like that. And, I think it is scarier to the reader. I mean, I could see Gary's point, like Lovecraft described it this way and then said, "Nah, that's stupid," and crumpled up the piece of paper and threw it away. And he said, "Well, let's describe it this way," and then crumpled that one up. And eventually said, "What if I just don't describe it?" And that's,
and it might have been a combination of both. I don't know. You don't know. None of us.
Right. So yeah, I like a majority of the movies that are based on Lovecraft stories, as long as I don't overthink the Lovecraft aspect. If I just say, "Oh, this is pretty cool," like Reanimator, movies like that. I mean, yeah, okay, that's kind of cool. I mean, I still have yet to read, and I have a copy of it, and I gotta find it. The Herbert West Reanimator. I have a copy of that book in big print because my eyes are crap now. And I haven't read that yet, but I want to sit down and just have a week, just read that, nothing else.
If you have not read Lovecraft, keep in mind there's a learning curve. His writing is archaic. It was archaic at the time he was writing it. He was very inspired by people like Lord Byron and Edgar Allan Poe. And so he was writing as if it was, 50 years or 70 years earlier. And now it really seems archaic. It takes a little while to get the hang of his writing and sort of get the flow of it. Once you get there, though, it becomes sort of natural.
It does. I usually do keep a dictionary at arm's reach.
Yeah.
But it is very good. He's one of my favorite writers. It's worth. It's worth the battle to get through it. It really is.
Yeah, he was an interesting person. I mean, his writings were amazing.
We could devote an entire show to talking about it.
Yeah, we could talk about
that. Despite what some people say, I mean, yeah, there were some very, very flawed aspects of his personality, but he was a lot more complicated in those things than a lot of people give him credit for. So we could, like I say, we could do a whole show talking about him.
Oh yeah.
There's so much there, and so many people sort of gloss it over and try to put him, plain black and white, very simple terms, and he doesn't really apply. You have to dig a lot deeper.
All right, Bill, your turn.
Okay, well, most of the rest of my list are not a whole lot of horror movies, but they are definitely cult. So again, one of my check boxes is I love those kung fu action movies of the 70s. Especially the after Bruce Lee passes away, you had the Bruce exploitation movies with Bruce Lee and Bruce Leigh, and they had a bunch of different spellings. So Bruce Lee, Li, had this movie called Bruce Lee the Invincible, and they always threw Bruce Lee's name into it because I guess you couldn't really get suit for copyright in those days in China. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe the copyright laws were looser, but I do understand the Bruce Lee estate now owns copyright to these movies, so they are getting their money now. But in Bruce Lee the Invincible, you almost have to see this to believe it. Bruce Lee fights two kung fu gorillas, apes, and they are the cheapest man in ape suit things. It looks like a gorillagram, and they're doing the backflips and stuff like that. But they're supposed to be these gorillas. It's a hoot, but really, when you still look at it, it's like this thing that I read about. It was actually an article on Jess Franco, but it really applies to all cult movies or any genre of cult. Like a Jess Franco movie. It's not if you've seen one, you've seen them all. It's you haven't seen any of them until you've seen them all. In its greater concept of these kung fu action movies, it actually kind of works because these have been described as fighting Fred Astaire. It was extremely choreographed. There was a lot of thought and patience and effort and takes and retakes, I'm sure, that went into these things. So it's in its greater concept, and when you take in the cultural values of this being made in China for a Chinese audience originally, or maybe by this time they were trying to get it over into the United States. I'm not sure, but it kind of works on this weird psychedelic scale. And this one was 1978, by the way. So, if you used to watch that, what was it, Kung Fu Theater on USA in the early days of cable, this one used to come on a lot in the early to mid 80s. But it's a fun, I do like those Kung Fu action movies. I find them very interesting, and just the choreography that they used to do with them was, I thought pretty cool. And a lot of these guys had bit parts in the original Bruce Lee films, even all the way up to Jackie Chan had a bit part in one of the Bruce Lee films. And then they went on to do their own films after he passed away, trying to carry on the legacy. So it's a cool little interesting part of film history, but one that I think is worth exploring if you ever get the chance.
Oh yeah, I've watched so many of those martial arts movies in the 70s. I think one that I remember so well, but I don't remember the plot, is Master of the Flying Guillotine.
think I've seen that one actually. Yeah.
I
Is that
mean,
the one where he's
it's
got
like
like
this guy
this little helmet that
yeah,
yeah, and he throws it and
throws it,
pulls
and
a
then
chain in it. Yeah, decapitates the guy. Yeah.
uh,
I have
I'm
seen
like
that.
going, wow, yeah, that was like bizarre for a martial arts thing, you know. But you know, there was a lot of, just like in horror, they were very inventive with this stuff, you know. I
Trying
mean,
to outdo each other on different levels.
Even Hammer got into it for that one. Was it the Seven Golden Vampires or something like that? And it had Peter Cushing, where Dracula, and it wasn't
You guys,
Christopher Lee, escapes and he goes inside of a Shaolin priest or something like that. And oh, it was bizarre.
yeah, that is the
You know,
last of that is the last of the Dracula series in Hammer. It's actually part of the canon,
yeah,
Dracula canon. It's the last film in the canon.
yeah. You know, I think it's because they had Peter Cushing in it. You know, because I think he was in each one of them, if I'm not mistaken. But
I think he's in all of them. Yeah,
that was a fun movie.
Christopher Lee is not in that one. That's one that he turned
No,
down. They wanted him in
yeah,
that. He was like, I'm done with
no,
this.
it's like no, you keep your martial arts stuff. But a lot of great ones, and I'll talk to you about my next one. I Drink Your Blood. This was one that it was originally released, I think either 70 or 71, and my dad took me and my brother to a drive-in for like I think it was a double feature with another one called I Eat Your Skin, which was I found out later on. I was looking it up, and it was an old black and white voodoo zombie movie, but then they just retitled just to re-release it and put it with this, but it had nothing to do. And it was a triple feature with this, I Eat Your Skin, and I Spit on Your Grave. This is what so I saw that at 10 years old, all three of them. This is basically they're not zombies. These are people infected with rabies, and they become completely rabid, running around the area. And what it was is this: is there was a satanic biker group that came to town, and they took over an abandoned building, but then they started harassing the town folks. And this particular town, it was dwindling because the mine wasn't okay. The I guess it was a mining town, and it just was going dry. And but there was only one business left, and it was a meat pie. And up until that time, I never heard of it, a meat pie. You know, now I think it's kind of in the lines of a chicken pot pie, but with meat. And so the little boy whose mom runs it sees how evil these guys are, terrorizing everyone. So he goes. There's a rabid dog with a syringe and takes out the rabid dog's blood, puts it in the meat pie
Oh,
to
jeez.
sell to the satanic biker people, and they go fucking bonkers. I mean, lopping off people's heads. They're not eating people; they're just killing people. And because the only way you can stop them is water, because it's hydrophobia. That's what causes one of the things in rabies. So when I saw that for years and years afterwards, wherever I went to, I was looking for a hose, just in case if those things come out, I can go to that hose and turn on the water and spray them down. I mean, it had one of the more lasting effects on me, giving me nightmares for years. My mom almost told my dad no more horror movies for him. You know, you give him nightmares, and you know that never happened. But this is one. It's from on Grindhouse Releasing, and it is pretty gruesome. I mean the um, the special effects were pretty basic. I mean, when they lopped off one of the guy's heads and they have him showing the head, it looks like it's a mannequin's head. You know, you can, you know, that's the one thing with back then. They have to do a lot of practical effects because they didn't have access to anything high tech. But it was a good movie. I mean, it's a good movie. You know, if you like, I mean, I kind of would say it's in the zombie family, but you know, not really. Yeah, in the zombie, but it kind of falls in that same category because you know people are going nuts. All right, Gary, your turn.
Okay, for my next one, I'm going to go to a movie that is definitely a cult movie, but people who know, and it's arguably one of the very first slasher movies. It certainly was. John Carpenter was influenced by it. It's Black Christmas.
Yes.
And it is an absolute classic. And what's one of the really funny things about that is you've got this totally dark horror movie centered around Christmas. And Bob Clark was the director who years later directed A Christmas Story.
Really?
So
I
it's kind
did
of
not.
funny that he's got these two completely different Christmas movies. You know, and another thing about this movie that I thought was really interesting is when they came out with the second remake a few years ago, people went, "Oh my God, they're pushing a feminist agenda." Well, if you actually watch the original one, the men are completely ineffectual in the movie. You know, they're absolutely useless. It's the women who are actually able to try to do something. You know, they actually have it together. So it's actually was a feminist sort of tale to begin with there. The one man who's actually trying to help is the father of the one girl who's missing, and he's being so judgmental on all the girls because they're living a lifestyle that isn't what he thinks is appropriate for women, you know. And so it really had a feminist agenda at the time, but they don't seem to notice that. Or my thought is a lot of these people have never seen it because it is sort of still a cult movie,
Right.
And it just works so well on so many levels. It's super dark. You really have no idea who the killer is, and even at the end, you kind of don't. It's really creepy. The whole creepy phone call thing.
Oh yeah.
Which, you know, with the phone calls coming from another part of the house and everything. That's so much stuff was borrowed and used in other movies from that film. It was really groundbreaking.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then they had a window of opportunity to make a sequel the way they ended it.
Right.
And I think I was watching some of the bonus things to get that disgusting voice on the phone. It was three guys doing it, and then they spliced it all together. And I'm like, oh, I mean, it takes prank calling to a new level.
Yeah,
You know,
that voice was so creepy.
yeah. You know who I think Fulci tried to. I think he heard that voice when he did New York Ripper. I'm not sure if you've seen that. Where basically, the killer's voice sounds like a duck. think he was trying to get, maybe he got inspiration from Black Christmas to have the killer have a weird, odd voice, because I don't remember if you saw the killer in New York Ripper or not. But yeah.
I've always felt that when the Black Christmas probably inspired all those other holiday-oriented horror movies, New Year's Evil, and then what is it, My Bloody Valentine, and there just became one after the other. You know, what holiday are we missing?
Well, I think it inspired Halloween, and then Halloween was such a huge success with such a low budget that from there they just they all sprang out there. I mean, Friday the 13th freely admits that's where they got the idea to do it.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, going completely off, you go a couple years earlier than Black Christmas, there's an Italian movie called A Bay of Blood, and there's some kills in The Bay of Blood that you see in the first Friday the 13th.
Right.
Verbatim.
Yes. And I would suggest, when I said that it's probably the first slasher movie.
Yeah.
I think maybe you could argue that Psycho is the first Psycho movie, first slasher film, but there was a long period of time before there was another one.
And there's only one. There's only really one slasher scene in Psycho.
Yeah, that's true.
I call it more of a precursor to slasher movies myself, is what I define it. But
oh yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. All right, Bill, you're up.
Okay, I had to throw in a kaiju movie or two because I'm a huge kaiju fan. So I was looking at the list of 70s kaiju, and one that is one of my particular favorites is Yog the Monster from Space, which is sometimes also known as Space Amoeba. Once again, we have aliens coming in from outer space, and this alien can turn into several different giant kaijus. One is an octopus, and one is a giant turtle, not to be confused with Gamera. And wait, what is the third one? Anyway, he turns into a couple of these things, and there's some people stranded on the island who are fighting with this monster. It's a lot of fun. I don't know if I'd say it's one of the best kaijus, but it was always one of my favorites. And again, one reason that has a special place in my heart, as some of you mentioned before, I first saw it on one of those late night horror movie host TV shows, the Late Grade Horror Show in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Our host was kind of like Chilly Billy Cardilli. He wasn't dressed up as a vampire or anything like that. He was just this radio host who came out and introduced the movies.
Right.
But it was still pretty funny. And Jim Cook was the host. And he was kind of a local celebrity at the time. He used to do all kinds of commercials and public appearances. Everybody liked him. But it's a fun little kaiju movie that if you get a chance, it is definitely worth checking out.
All right. I kind of alluded to my next movie, I Spit on Your Grave. I think I want to say that this is the ultimate revenge movie. The woman is brutalized, raped, and then she gets the guys that did it to her get killed in most unusual ways, and some of them cringe-worthy. You kind of like grab your privates when when she does something with this one guy. And
the bathtub scene, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the bathroom scene. And I think it was banned for many years in several different countries because it was just so brutal. But the thing is, it was a revenge movie. It was, it wasn't really like she went out there deciding, oh, I'm going to kill all these guys. She went out to this cabin just to write. She was a writer, and she just wanted peace and quiet, because I think from the big city, and wanted peace and quiet to write her book. And then these, I believe that they were rednecks, come in, and they just start brutalizing her. And so she just knocks them off one by one in very unusual ways, including, I love the one scene, you've probably seen, if you've seen clips, where she's in a motorboat, where she's holding the engine to go, and she's got an axe, and like she's coming towards, I mean, whoever it is, and she acts the guy, he's in the lake. And it, I mean, a lot of it is suggestive kills, but they're very, in a way, personal. Like I said, the bathroom scene, you, it's, I mean, if you don't mind revenge as the the plot, you know, it's a really good movie.
It's
I think it was
brutal movie. I've seen it. Actually, I saw it when I started renting horror movies, and I think probably around the same time I rented Black Christmas that Gary was just talking about.
yeah, and I mean, yeah, I think I rented it that way back, you know, on VHS, and the VHS player at the time was in the family room, so I had to wait till everybody was gone to watch it. Because if my mom came in and saw me watching this, I think she would have blew a top, you know. And it's like, so.
Well, let me just say one thing. I have not seen the movie, but you know, just I've read about it, and from your description there, one point I want to make. I think one of the things they were trying to say in that movie is don't make a writer mad. They will think of very inventive ways to kill you because they're going to think of inventive ways to kill people.
Exactly. You're up, Gary.
Okay, the next one I'm gonna do, I know was a made-for-TV movie, starring none other than William Shatner, Kingdom of the Spiders, which, you know, I don't know if it was a big hit on TV, but you know, again, it was a TV movie, and I like the fact that they didn't have supernatural spiders. It was not these huge spiders. It was just massive amounts of tarantulas. And they were everywhere. And, you know, the ending, again, it had one of those 1970s endings, which was not everybody lives happily ever after.
Right.
You know, it's again, it's a little slow at times, but I think if you notice most of the slow scenes, they do actually have spiders in them, though, if you pay attention.
Right.
So the creepiness is and the terror is there, even though you don't notice it sometimes, or at least the characters don't notice it.
Right. And you got William Shatner.
Yeah.
Or is he like, or they call him now the Shat?
Yeah.
Shat.
Yeah, he did a lot of those B movies in the 70s.
Yeah. Devil's Reign. That almost made the cut, but that was God, that movie's bad in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. All right, Bill.
All right. One of my other dogs just got let in, so it might be distracting here. But I do have one other horror movie on the list. The rest are going to be science fiction. But my last horror movie is Piranha. You've seen that? Another one of those Jaws knockoffs.
Yeah.
I had a hard time deciding between Piranha and Orca, but I had to go with Piranha for two reasons. Piranha has Barbara Steele as one of the scientists, one of my favorites. I had to get Barbara Steele in there somewhere. And it's another one produced by Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Is a producer of Piranha. And they are genetically engineering these piranhas. And of course, they escape and they're attacking people in this river along at the beach and everything. Very reminiscent of Jaws, which came out just a couple years prior. So I mean, and you could almost do a whole show just on Jaws knockoffs.
Oh yeah.
I got into a thing a couple of years ago on Facebook with me and one of my friends kept going back and forth and finding all these Jaws knockoff movies between whenever Jaws came out, 75 or 76, until like the early 80s, 82, 83. And there's got to be 100 of them at least.
Oh yeah.
But Piranha was one of the more popular ones. And it's one where the plot still kind of makes sense for the most part. It's really not a bad film.
It kind of had a science fiction aspect to it too.
Definitely, yeah.
It's funny. One of the guys I know pretty well who runs a Lovecraft podcast, and he does a lot of Lovecraft panels and stuff. He says that Jaws is a Lovecraftian movie because he says that the shark represents ancient evil, an ancient evil being, and I can sort of see his point.
Yeah, I think I could see it, especially the way Jaws was filmed, because it's another one of those. We were kind of talking about this earlier. You don't see the shark very much in that film.
No.
And of course, the reason is because the mechanical shark that they made broke, and so they had to find inventive ways of representing this shark. So again, it makes your imagination imagine the monster, which is always a scarier monster, because my version is going to be my scariest version, and Gary's going to be his scariest version.
Exactly.
Ron's going to be his scariest version. So it makes it for a better film and not a worse film. But Piranha's a decent one of those knockoffs.
Yeah, I didn't really like the remakes that much because it really didn't.
Yeah, there was a couple remakes a couple years ago.
One in 3D. I'm like, but there was quite a few Piranha movies that I got into because of Piranha. One with Lee Majors where they added kind of like a heist element to it, where they're going after some treasure, and it seems to be in the area that's the treasure is piranhas. So it's like Lee Majors fighting off piranhas. It was called Killer Fish.
Okay.
And it was pretty good. I mean, I remember that one was as scary, because these piranhas, just like I would say if you're going to do a double feature of piranhas, those two.
I think I've heard of that one, but I don't think I've seen it. Or if I have, it's been many years.
It had several different names, and I don't remember the other one. Something, about gold, because there was gold at the bottom of this lake or something like that. And it was a pretty good movie. It was done in the early 80s, but it looks 70s.
Actually, sounds like I don't know if you've seen it, but what was that? What was that movie with the ship that overturns?
Ghost Ship?
Trying to get out of that. What's that?
Ghost Ship?
No, it was oh shoot. It was one of those Irwin Allen movies.
Oh, okay. The Poseidon
Adventure. But if you've seen the Poseidon Adventure 2, it kind of sounds like that. Because that's Telly Savalas is going in there trying to get all the treasures that are in the Poseidon, and not nearly as good as the original Poseidon Adventure, but it kind of sounds like a similar plot.
There's also, have you seen the movie Blood Tide?
Yes.
Yeah, with James Earl Jones, and it's really kind of a bizarre movie, but there's like a treasure inside this cave, and there's a total Lovecraftian sea monster that lives there, and James Earl Jones decides he's going to go get the treasure. It's really bizarre because James Earl Jones' character recites Shakespeare constantly, and
oh yeah.
He's like a frustrated actor or something.
Isn't Barbara Bach in that too, or no?
Maybe.
No. Okay, not her. I forgot her name, but I'm picturing now the cover of the thing. It's not her, but yeah, that was a good one.
I mean, you can get. There's ways you have to motivate your characters, right? We talked about things could be a good motivator for things, and treasure can be a good motivator to face a monster or something, right? So it makes for good stories, though. It gives people believable motivation to do for their actions.
Well, and to some degree, you take something like that's a trope that you could say it's overused, but to some degree it's overused because people understand it, and you don't have to explain too much to get the idea of what this person's doing,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as long as it's believable, that's the big thing.
All right. Well, my next one, it kind of veers away from horror, almost in the thriller area, psychological, and it's The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. It's with Jodie Foster, and she plays this girl that she lives all alone, but she has to, so she doesn't go into into a group home or whatever. She has her father, before he passed away, set up a trust account for her that she can go to the bank and get whatever money she needed to get whatever whatever she needed to survive until she was able to get a job. And it was just so mysterious. Then all of a sudden, one of the characters, played by Martin Sheen, a total creeper, he's always trying to get up in his business, and it's almost in the molestation area, and she like she had to kill some people because the tagline on the thing is, ask her no questions, she tells you no lies. Ask her too many and somebody dies. And it's a very much a product of the 70s. I mean, having Martin Sheen in the most unlikable character he's ever played. And Jodie Foster looks like she's very timid, but she looks like she can hold her own when she needs to. And it was like almost like, I think nowadays, if your father passes or parents pass away and they have money set aside for you, it's known that, hey, the kid's not going to go to a foster. They got all the money that they need to survive. Just have like not an executor, but just someone that handles the money aspect. But she made it like a thing like the father was still alive, and it sounds like the father has been gone for a few years, and everyone in the town's always asking, where's Mr. Such and Such? Oh, he's away on a business trip. He'll be back, such and such a time. And then when someone was coming around to see it, he said, oh, he's really busy in the study. He's got a lot of work that he needs to be done, and he can't be disturbed. Every excuse in the book and it's like, you're wondering, when is she going to get caught? And it's like, and it's very tense in that aspect, but it's a good movie. More psychological thriller than horror, but still, I kind of put it in there because of the killings part.
So sort of a precursor to Home Alone, huh?
Yeah, but a little more brutal.
A horror version of Home Alone. Which
Yeah,
that
movie could have easily been turned into a horror movie.
I can see how that could work. Yeah, I can see how that would work.
All right, Gary.
Okay, for my next one, this one, the whole cult movie thing really probably doesn't qualify, but I wanted to include it anyway. It was a made-for-TV movie, so maybe in that aspect, but I think at least at one time it was one of the most popular made-for-TV movies, which is The Night Stalker, which introduced Kolchak and which became a TV series, unfortunately for only one season. And he's a reporter, and he's just such a great character. My friend Mike Korn, who runs Wormwood, once said that if Night Stalker, the TV series, had gone 2 seasons, Kolchak would probably go down in history as one of the greatest TV characters of all time. And I think that's probably true, because he just was so good at getting into trouble and getting himself back out of it, and doing it with a sense of humor a lot of the time. Just sort of, he was kind of a jerk sometimes, but he was so likable about it that, and in this case, he's investigating a vampire, and like what became the familiar trope, nobody believes him that there's a vampire.
Right.
And so he has to take it on himself to destroy the vampire. And that wound up, that got us another movie, The Night Strangler, which then led to the TV series. But yeah, it's such a classic movie. It's just so good.
Yeah, the Kolchak series, those ones were for TV movies. They were really scary. for the time.
I much prefer the first one. I'm not as big a fan of the second one. The second one was a lot more inventive, but I
Yeah.
thought that the second one was a little slow in places, a little too slow
Yeah.
sometimes. For me anyway.
Yeah. But the series, oh my God, the monsters and creatures, and I mean, again, it was even in their newsroom where it's supposed to looks like it's daytime, it still had a lot of dark shadows on it. I'm always, when he was typing, or doing something in there, I was always afraid, when it's one of those monsters that he's going after, what if they find out where he's at and they go after him there? I mean,
one did visit him there, the Spanish moss monster, because he got into his desk drawer and there was Spanish moss in the drawer.
Yeah. But yeah, I kind of agree with that. He would have gone down as the greatest TV character.
He's definitely catching on more now than I hear more about him now than I have in decades myself. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe I've lived under a rock or something. It might be an accurate accusation sometimes, but
well, I remember watching the show when it was first aired because I'm old enough and I was into I was definitely a monster kid, so I watched the TV show and I watched the movies when they first aired, and I can remember it as I remember, they tended to move the time slot on it and somebody preempt it. And it's like I always blame that for it not taking off.
I think that's
all that well because they didn't have a consistent schedule for it.
That could be. That hurts a lot of TV shows when the TV producers don't take it seriously enough and move around the time slot.
Yeah, I never saw the first run. I think it was in syndication, I think maybe the following year. And a lot of times they play it late at night, which those are the best time to watch those. And it's scary. I mean, I'm always looking over my shoulder when I was watching those things. And you obviously know that that's one of the inspirations for X-Files.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And in fact,
no doubt.
They brought Darren McGavin on to the X-Files. And when Chris Carter originally wanted him on, he wanted him on as Kolchak. But McGavin had such a bad experience with that show that he didn't want anything to do with the character after that.
Right.
So he refused to do the character, so they rewrote it and made him a sort of similar character, but it wasn't Kolchak. I wish he had done it as Kolchak, though.
Did you watch the remake series that
I think there were actually two. I tried to watch one of them and it wasn't very good.
Yeah, the remake that has I forgot the actor's name, but it didn't even go for a season. I think it was like maybe 9 or 10 episodes, which nowadays is a season. But I think in the mid 90s, I want to say, or early 2000s, I really forgot the actor's name, and they kind of gave it like the character Kolchak. He had a curse.
I remember that.
I thought, okay, but and I like how cleverly, like you said, Darren McGavin didn't want anything to do with the character. I love how cleverly they put a cardboard cutout of Darren McGavin, like in the back, to make it look like he was there. But I mean, that show could be, if done right, it could be remade.
I don't know that you can do it without McGavin. To me, there was something special about that guy and the way he played that character.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you could do it with someone else. Maybe someone who we don't even know about, somebody who has a completely different flair. Maybe, but I just can't see it working without him.
Some of the remakes
kind of bumbling in a way.
Yeah, in a way.
Some of the remakes that I think actually work are the ones where they do try to replicate the original actor. So if you had somebody trying to do that, you might be able to get away with maybe.
Yeah.
But it's still, I just want to point out that Gary made his second reference to A Christmas Story today because Darren McGavin was the father.
Right.
Right.
I just had to throw that out there. But anyway.
Another connection.
Another connection, yeah. All right, Bill, your turn.
All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about Logan's Run as a good another science fiction fantasy type movie. It's such a good science fiction movie, one that I think is really tied into its time of the 70s. I don't think you could redo, although I think they did try a couple years ago, but uh it's just because that whole idea, never trust anyone over 30. So everyone to turn 30, you have it's like that whole counterculture won out, and this was the world that it created. Um
Right.
yeah, but it is such a interesting film, and some of the things are coming true with the how you get a date in that movie, right? The internet and all that stuff.
Right.
It's a little creepy sometimes, but it is there. And it did come from a source material that was a novel, which I think is also rather interesting, a best-selling science fiction novel. Peter Ustinov then is that one old guy that did survive and uh, hidden away. But it is an interesting, and it is does kind of question this. What if some people over 30 are trustworthy? Maybe.
Yeah.
So,
If I remember correctly, he was living with a whole bunch of cats in the Capitol building.
yeah, yeah, away from the city where everybody else is living, where they're
Yeah.
escaped. Um,
Well, so almost like they were in a bubble. They
yes,
didn't know anything existed outside of there until Logan decides,
yeah, because he was escaping because he was one of them that was supposed to kill everyone when they turned 30, and then of course he turned 30, and he had to get out of there. That
And he
was
found out no one renews.
yeah, that was a good one. The TV series was
Yeah, the TV series was pretty bad.
Sometimes I forget there was a TV series, but you're right, there was one.
It'd be nice to forget there was a TV series.
It was. I'll say it was forgettable because it had too many of the '70s cliches going on.
Yeah.
Television cliches, and I was like, you're getting too far from the story. You know,
Mm.
I like it when someone expands upon the story, but when you get too far out, I don't know. I guess that's a good one.
It'd be a hard one to redo or to expand on a whole lot anyway. It's pretty tight the way it is, I think, in my opinion.
And my next one is Brian De Palma's very first movie, major movie, I should say, Phantom of the Paradise. This one, the music is amazing on it. It's really up there with, I'm going to say it, with Rocky Horror Picture Show. But it's just so different. The story is basically a combination of Phantom of the Opera and Faust, and has Paul Williams in there. And a friend of mine told me for the music how some of it is really kind of dark, almost metal sounding. This was a period of Paul Williams' life where he was hooked on heroin, so he was a little more on the creative side, and but the music is amazing, and the you can see the mask that the Phantom wears is just, for me, it's probably, if it was a little more popular with an iconic mask being, that up there with, Jason and, and Michael Myers and stuff, but great musical. It's like, and I like the tagline at the bottom. He sold his soul for rock and roll. If you like, it starts. The music hits all the generations. Like they have some '50s kind of sounding stuff, and then '60s, and then when the Phantom shows up, and the music is all his source material, and he wrote like this a big concerto, and the guy that's played by Paul Williams was butchering it up, and so the Phantom was killing people in the most bizarre ways. It had one of the characters, his name is Beef, and let's see what's
Beef instead of meatloaf? Is that?
Yeah, it was Beef, and he was basically like a glam rock star, and here a little bit of, you know, he was at the time you would call him queer, and because, you know, he had the persona on stage as, you know, ultra macho, but then off stage he was like this kind of wimpy, feminine kind of a guy, you know. But and it's a great one. And it's so funny that it's Brian De Palma's first movie. You know, that he would do that, but then he'd go on to produce all those other great movies. But if you like Rocky Horror Picture Show, or even Rock and Roll High School, this is something you'll enjoy. And then it does have some horror aspects to it, but not enough that, you know, you can put it in kind of a traditional. It's more kind of campy. So that's mine.
I've heard some good things about that one. In fact, they used to do this. They used to show movies at the Chesapeake Library, and the guy who hosted it would show that one quite frequently. Actually, it was one of his favorites, he would say. So.
I liked it so much that years ago in the '90s, I tracked down the CD soundtrack, and it's out of print. I was hoping when they reissued, you know, Shout Factory reissued, that they would have put the soundtrack in there remastered, because it does need some remastering. It's muddy in parts, but still great music.
If you don't mind me throwing in a personal plug, I did a story just recently for Wormwood Chronicles for Mike Korn about the history of selling your soul for rock and roll, and you know, it was mostly about one of the first guys who did that, a blues player from the 1930s.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, if you wanted to check that out, if you don't mind me throwing in that plug.
Oh, no
Mike and Wormwood should be really, really happy because they're getting lots of plugs.
Hey, he's getting lots of plugs today.
Okay, so I guess I'm up. My next one is sort of heavily related to the last one. It's another made for TV. And I guess we should actually talk just a little bit about Dan Curtis, because Dan Curtis was the man for horror in the 70s on TV anyway. He was the guy behind Dark Shadows, which was obviously the 60s, but it went into the 70s. And then you had, he did Kolchak, the movie. He also did Trilogy of Terror, which is an absolute favorite for a lot of people, including me. I like that movie. But another one that I don't think people know as much about was the Norliss tapes. Now, the Norliss tapes, to me, I had a discussion with a friend about this, and he didn't agree with me. But I think the Norliss tapes came after Kolchak. And when they went from the two movies into the TV series, Dan Curtis was kind of cut out of it. I don't know if it was by choice or what happened, but in any event, he wasn't involved with the TV series.
Right.
Well, he came out with the Norliss tapes, which is about a writer who has stumbled onto some kind of supernatural thing, and in this case, he's missing. And this was designed to be a TV series also. It was played by Roy Thinnis, who was the main character in the Invaders series back in the 60s, which was another favorite of mine. And it really feels in a lot of ways like Kolchak. The movie's kind of slow. And you only see the character because he is missing the entire time. You only see him in flashbacks of tapes that his editor is listening to. But yeah, I think it very much has that Kolchak kind of vibe, probably about as close as you're going to get to Kolchak without being Kolchak.
Right. Yeah, I remember, it's been years since I've seen it, so I don't remember the whole plot about it, but I remember, yeah, it had that 70s mysterious vibe to it, you know, that I liked.
Right, and the ending is sort of a setup for the next for the episode to come, which it never got picked up, so it never happened. But
shame when that happens, you know.
Yeah, I
I
think it's a good series.
I watched one on YouTube. It was called Time Traveler or Travelers. It was from the 70s, and the guy was going back before the Chicago fire to pick up. There was a doctor that had a cure for a disease. Now that was 1873, so 1973, so 100 years later, that disease came back, and they didn't know how to combat it. Well, someone that created a time machine, they went back, and just the way they ended at the last thing, it could have gone on to be in a TV show. And someone goes, we'd like to go. We were thinking about going back to the time of the Black Plague. And I could have seen that would have been short-lived if they went on to this TV series, because you know, a little too intellectual in a way, but it was very 70s, and they tend to do that even today. It's like they don't give shows a chance, you know. So it's like I almost feel like if I was making a TV show, I would write out the first season and have an ending. I wouldn't put any allusion to if there was going to be something else. And if it got a second season, oh, okay, I'll write another story and do this. Just kind of do that, you know, have your conclusion to the thing. Now, you know, but yeah, that was a good choices. All right, Bill, your turn.
All right. Yeah, Dan Curtis was a excellent in the 70s.
He also did Dracula.
He did. It was a version of Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein.
No, with Jack. He did
Yeah.
Jack
Jack
Palance.
Palance.
Yeah.
And don't forget Curse of the Spider Woman.
And Curse of the Spider-Man. I love that one. That's one of my favorites of his, actually. So my next one is The Black Hole, if you've seen that one. Disney's.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always had a personal theory of this. I'm not 100% sure if it's accurate at all, but there was a proposed sequel to Star Wars that became a book called Splinter in the Mind's Eye. And that was supposed to be, and I just recently read that was supposed to be the sequel. If Star Wars had failed, they could do this sequel, which would be a lot cheaper to make. And the plot is very similar to The Black Hole, which was a Disney movie. So it's kind of almost Disney's first foray into Star Wars. So
Yeah.
if you haven't seen it, it's very much Journey to the Center of the Earth, but in outer space kind of a thing.
Yeah. With Maximilian, the rope that.
Yes, and it stars Anthony Perkins has a part in it, so there's a bunch of some pretty good names in there as well.
Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah, as the mad scientist almost, but you don't know he's mad for most of the movie. Half
I
of
think
the
his name is Maximilian Schell, is the actor.
something like that. Yeah. So
That was actually the first, I'll go quote unquote serious Disney movie. Everything up to that point was family related. This wasn't a family movie.
no, it was pretty serious. Yeah, yeah. And I think I want to say I didn't look this up, but I think Jim Henson even had something to do with some of the robots and things in there as well.
Yeah, Slim Pickens did one of the voices.
I believe so. Yes.
Bob, the broken down robot.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I went to go see that with my dad and my uncle. It was just right after Star Wars came out, so it's like it was too kind of like, was it 78 or 79 that it came
I'll
out?
say it's 79. Let me look here.
Yeah, so it's like just maybe
79.
less than a year that. Well, no, about almost 2 years that.
Just a little over a year, like a year and a half, I think. Or so.
Yeah, and I loved it. I still love it, and people I talk about it. Very few people know about it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Classic sci-fi. All right, I'm gonna go We were talking about Peter Cushing earlier. Shockwaves, Nazi zombies, but these zombies don't eat people; they just kill them. And Peter Cushing plays an SS officer that is stranded on this island. Off the shore of the island, there's a giant ship that they created these, again, genetically engineered SS, the death troopers, that they don't die and they can go underwater anywhere, and they just they're able to kill at any point. And so he sinks the ship, and then fast forward to this other ship with a group of tourists. Their ship has bad weather and it crashes on shore, and they go to where it was a building that's where Peter Cushing's character is, and he's just warning them, you need to get off the island. These death troopers, once they sense someone's here, they will come, and they just basically knocked off everyone except for this one female that was played by Brooke Adams. And there was a character in it that this was done just before Star Wars, so that Peter Cushing went on to play Grand Moff Tarkin.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy in there that had blonde hair, and he said in the extras, saying, "I wish I went with Peter Cushing." He says, "I could have been Luke Skywalker." Because, and I mean, this is a great zombie movie. Someone goes, the best of the Nazi zombies. I mean, it's pretty cool, and they do kind of look like that. And when you tear off their goggles, they die, because that's protecting their senses, and it's a pretty bizarre, and again, another has creepy elements to it, and it's all shot in the daytime, but like I said, the zombies, they would be, like, if it's a little stream, they would be laying at the bottom of the stream looking up and watching people walk by. That's one. This is one of my favorite. Another one of my favorite zombie movies. Even though the killings are pretty much, zombies get them and then they go and they die. Just really over dramatic kind of a death. But it's a good one. I mean, if you like that, mid-70s kind of. I mean, they're more like the voodoo type of zombies, because they weren't there to eat people. All right, you're Bill. Gary.
Okay, so for my final one, I'm kind of going with what might be argued as the ultimate cult classic of the 70s. It spawned a whole series of movies that were also cult movies. It's like horror fanatics love them, and they're talked about in legendary terms, but outside of certain fanatics, people really don't know that much about them. Is the Phantasm movies. And the first Phantasm movie, I remember seeing that at the theater, and that movie is so crazy. It's like, it's science fiction. It's got weird little almost sand people monsters.
Right.
It's got the ball that goes and bleeds people, and the tall man. It's so many things, and then weird traveling between dimensions and all this stuff, and some of it in a way doesn't make sense, but yet it does in some strange, almost psychedelic way.
Yeah.
And I remember for years that was, to me, the scariest movie I'd ever seen. I found it terrifying at the theaters.
Yeah, everything was kind of like an implied thing. Again, the use of shadows. you know.
Yeah, and there was a lot of things you thought it was reality, and all of a sudden, nope, that's not reality. That's some illusion that's been created. Something else completely is happening, and then oh nope, that's an illusion too.
Yeah, yeah, that was a trip, but it was a fun trip.
All right. I have to get going here. Actually, it's supposed to be leaving around 5, but let me just do my last movie very quickly. I wanted to hit one more Gamera movie, one more kaiju movie, Gamera versus Monster X. If you haven't seen this one, it's my favorite Gamera movie. It's the one where these little kids hijack a submarine. Gamera gets beaten by the monster for temporarily, gets injected by the monster's tail, has this spike that injects him with actually an egg that turns out to be another Monster X. Jiger is the monster's name, Monster X. And these little kids get into a submarine and they go into Gamera, and it becomes almost like a kaiju version of Fantastic Planet. They're going through Gamera's body. So instead of them being small, of course, Gamera's huge, so they can do this without being small. And they have to kill the baby Jiger monster that's inside of Gamera and save the day. So it's a very fun Gamera movie, one of my favorites. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
You had me at Gamera. Those were all so much fun.
Did you get the Gamera box sets?
I actually already had all the movies.
I have the one from Arrow.
Yeah, they did 2 versions. They did all of them together in one box set.
That's the one I have.
And then they split them up into 2. I think they had 2 different eras.
Yeah, I think they did the original era, and then I think the 2 later eras were in the other set.
I have the set with the '90s ones, Gamera. The '90s movies. But there's actually the original versions. Actually, all have 2 versions. There was the Sandy Scott version came out a bit later, the VHS, and the original were American International Television. And they even have different titles, like instead of Gamera versus Guiron, I think it's War of the Planets or something like that. I don't know. War of the Monsters was the second one. Gamera versus what was that monster's name with the rainbow coming out of his back?
I still love how those movies sort of transformed. It's like you went from the very first one was basically a Godzilla copy, and he was totally a monster. And then as it goes on later and later, they become more kid oriented, and he's like a hero, and he becomes a superhero, and the kids are like, use your jets, Gamera. Gamera, you're so cool.
Even the second movie, he's still actually a villain. He knocks down a dam in the beginning of the movie. So
it's like it was a transition from one.
It was.
And they're all fun though.
They are.
Oh yeah, those are fun movies. All right, well, I'm going to do my last one, and it's the Toolbox Murders. A slasher from 1978. I don't know if it came before or after Halloween, but this one takes place in an apartment building, and basically the super he kills people with basically tools from his toolbox. And they did a remake, which wasn't that great, but the movie when I first saw it, had a very unsettling feeling about it. I don't know, just the way the subject matter was done. It has, what is his name? Cameron Mitchell. He was the killer. And I like that. It says, bit by bit by bit, he carved a nightmare. And this one had, this one kind of falls more under an exploitation than a slasher, but it had a lot of slasher elements to it. And it was a really good one. They did a remake, but they got way too much from what the story was all about. And I mean, had a lot of things, being killed by drill, hammer, saw, just various things in the guy's toolbox. And That's a pretty good one. You know, something that kind of, I guess nowadays would fall under a grindhouse type of a movie.
Probably so.
But that's all my movies.
Okay.
So you know, I think we had a pretty good, little over 2 hour show, and talked about a lot of great movies.
Yeah, this was fun.
It was.
And I was thinking for the next episode, we could go back. We could either go back to previous decade or go forward. You know, I was kind of thinking, let's go back to the '60s. There's a lot of good ones there too.
I can do pretty well with the 60s.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, we'll do the next episode about the '60s.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me. This has been a lot of fun.
This
Thank
was
you.
fun. Thank you.
Thanks for the invite, and I gotta run.
All
Yeah,
right.
me too.
All right.
See you guys.
See you later.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching this episode. And stay tuned for the next one.